So
There
we
we go.
are on.
We are
All
on.
righty. We kind of got lost in the bogs and the glaciers with our drilling equipment, getting all confused about millions of years and thousands of feet, but we think we got it squared away. Where are we? It is the middle of February, and we only have 2 more sessions today and in 2 weeks on the weather, and then we'll be going back to grow your own. Let me think. My scribbled up notes here that I almost threw away at the last minute. Okay, the last 2 sessions are going to basically be on global warming, climate change, and how that affects our weather. Okay, but I want to begin here, get my chairs situated, with a cautionary tale, which every now and again I think it's so relevant that I want to bring it up. And I do like my history and I like my astronomy, so it seems fitting. We're going to go back to the early 1600s when Galileo, among other things, was an astronomer. And he had just heard that somebody had invented what we now know as the telescope. And being a man of many talents, he immediately set about making his own. And as soon as he had it done, around 1610, he took it, now I'm not sure, either up to the attic and out the window, or maybe on his balcony, and aimed it at the sky. And lo and behold, one of the first amazing things he saw, do you remember?
I don't.
Jupiter.
Oh, yeah.
And what? What did we see when we looked? You weren't there at our star party that
No.
summer.
All the moons.
The 4 large moons that circle Jupiter. And I suppose most people today who don't know their religious history or even Western history realize how astounding that observation was, because in the 1600s, in the Western world, mostly Europe, the main power still, although it was fading by then, was still the Christian church. And it had looked back, way back to Aristotle, 2,000 years earlier. And even though Aristotle wasn't right, they accepted his view of what we now call the solar system. And that put the Earth, where did it put the Earth?
In the center.
In the center. And everything, the sun, the moon, the planets, the stars, all went around the Earth. Now, we shouldn't scoff at that, because that's what it looks like. Anybody standing here on the ground looking up, obviously I'm not moving, right?
Right.
Well, that's wrong, of course, but it sounds right. It feels right. But it wasn't right. But the church had entrenched itself in that old way of seeing things, and all its doctrines and its theology was bedrocked on that. And of course, in those days, if you disagreed, you were considered a heretic. And what happened to heretics?
You were killed.
Burnt at the stake, drowned, crushed with rocks, whatever. Wasn't thrown from the tower.
Horrible deaths.
Horrible deaths. So word got out, and eventually in a few years he was brought to trial. And not being a very brave man, he recanted. Although I love the story, which may or may not be true. Supposedly he said as he recanted to save his life, but it still turns. I like that. But then he was under house arrest for the rest of his life, about 15 years, I think. And some of his works weren't published until after he died. And then, of course, time rolls on and we learn more and more. Eventually, the church, after about 400 years, things move slowly with bureaucracies. They admitted Galileo was right, and that the sun was the center, not the Earth. Now, that was then. However, anybody that follows the news in the last, however old you are, there is a governor down in Florida who, when he came into power, decreed sounds like the 16th, 15th, 17th century, that any mention in government papers, whether it was the Florida Meteorological Society or whatever, you know, governments has lots of paperwork these days, struck out the words global warming and climate change. Now this popped into my head, and I'm sorry, I'm going to spring a question on her. When Teddy Roosevelt ran the second time as a Republican independently in 08 or whenever it was, what were the Republicans called in those days? Was it the Rhinoceros Party?
I don't know.
We'll have to look that up
Yeah.
after this program is over. Something or other. Well, I can't help but think the people that are doing this today, rather than accepting the science and retreating to tradition and authority, are ostriches. They're sticking their head in the sand. And if anybody has looked at a map of Florida, much of which is fairly close to sea level, if we continue as we are, within 200 years, much of Florida will be underwater. There will be no Florida anymore. So I think we ought to, rather than accept tradition without question, accept authority without question. At least we're not being burnt at the stake these days. But we do have similar problems. Seems that history repeats itself over and over again. Already. A quick review. Oh, by the way, I forgot. We were gonna pat ourselves on the back. You want to say what we discovered?
We discovered that we have listeners on both coasts. We have listeners in Boston and in
San Diego.
San Diego.
Yeah. It's quite a small horde out in San Diego. And then my cousin finally figured out how to find us online. And she didn't watch this program, but she enjoyed the gardening one.
Excellent.
As a matter of fact, she said, Mary Lou, it's kind of too late for me. My back is so bad these days, I can not do much in the way of gardening. And that reminded me, we ought to do one for old folks. Or young folks that are totally out of shape. You know, it's not just us old folks that can't bend over anymore. Yeah. So when we do the gardening one, we'll have to include one or two of those. Yeah. Okay. Review time. Once again, I'm springing this on her. See if she remembers. What's the weather? How do we define weather?
What's happening with the air temperature, air pressure?
Where is it happening?
On Earth.
Right, but very local. The weather is local. Right. Well, especially in the summertime with thunderstorms, it can be pouring rain in Hornell, 13 miles away, and we're dry as a bone up here in Alfred, or vice versa. Okay, day to day and local. And what's the climate then?
Climate is global and over
30
years.
I'm in the wings, bumping the actress here. Okay, climate, at least in America, with the National Weather Service, covers 30 years.
Okay.
And it's an average. And it's regional, not global, but there's like the Great Lakes, the Southeast, you know, the Northwest, because climate covers a bigger area than just your backyard.
Sure.
Okay. Alrighty. Now, what is this? Can we see a picture of the Myocene?
Yep.
Which is a period in time about 30 million years ago. Long time, 30 million years. And this is a scene, if we were there, people weren't there that long ago. In spite of that museum that have Adam and Eve along with the dinosaurs. But of course that didn't happen. Here we have a scene of strange animals in a climate with those trees are not the kind of trees we're familiar with, I don't believe. And let's see, we wrote down, let's back up. Today, let's go global for a minute. If you averaged the global Arctic equator, etc., the average temperature is 59 degrees Fahrenheit overall. back in the Miocene, 30 million years ago, it was 65 degrees, so 6 degrees warmer. The oceans, which surprised me, Melanie looked it up today, 68 degrees. So the oceans overall are warmer than the air. But back in the Miocene, they were 71 degrees. So modern day meteorologists are saying if we don't do something about this extra carbon being produced, we will be entering in a few centuries the Miocene again, and things will be very, very different. I have studied geology for a long time, and anybody who's done that, the Earth has been around for 4.5 billion years. That's a long time. There was one time when it was just a ball of molten rock, right? In the beginning. Then there was a time when it was called Snowball Earth. And we had snow and ice almost everywhere. And then, of course, they're digging up dinosaur bones in Antarctica. So obviously Antarctica was warmer once upon a time. So yes, climate changes. No one's arguing with that. Usually, I underline the usually, because there are some exceptions. Usually it's a gradual change over millions of years, and everything has time to adjust. But of course, everything doesn't, in the long haul, have time to adjust. Does anything living exist now that was alive 3 billion years ago?
No.
No? Extinctions come and go for a variety of reasons. Some take millions of years to occur. Some happen overnight, like with the dinosaurs. But my point is, it didn't matter all those years ago because people weren't around, and who cared?
Right.
The troglodytes didn't have a clue.
Right.
When they went extinct, it wasn't like, oh, poor us. You
Right.
know, it just doesn't matter. But tell me, are we up to 8 billion? I lost track
I
at
don't
7.
think we're at 8.
We're not quite to 8, but it won't be long.
It won't.
It won't be long. All righty. We're really not going to go there today. But think of Attila the Hun in the 400s and Genghis Khan in the 1200s. Part of that was due to there's too many people living here on our land and we can't survive anymore. We got to spread out. And what is happening, especially in Europe, which is close to Africa, and the migrations. Okay, we'll talk with that next time. Now, change. I'm going to say starting in the mid 1800s. That's around 1750, let's say, just before our revolution. 2 things happened that caused an increase in carbon output. And that's sort of the bad guy in this drama that's unfolding. By the mid 18th century, medicine had come a long way, and people weren't dying in their first 5 years. They were living longer. They were able to produce more. The food supply had become more reliable. And so a population growth began. Now, I wish my old friend John, who's not with us anymore, had a wonderful, he had looked it up, and he could recite it like a rote poem about how many million in the year whatever, and then how long it took to get to 2 million, and then how long to get to 4 million. And now I think, you can double check, guys, you know, sometimes the details are a little loose. I think it's now 17 years.
Wow.
Because of the demographics. What percent of the world's population is producing, you know, between the ages of 15 and 45 roughly. So we'll look at that too next time. Population, and the other was the Industrial Revolution, starting mostly in England, and then just gathered speed. And the more Industrial Revolution you had, the more carbon you were kicking into the atmosphere.
One interesting thing I found about the Miocene was
Okay.
the carbon dioxide was
Oh.
estimated between 400 and 600,
Good.
650 parts per million.
Uh-huh.
In 2019, it was 410 parts per million.
Yep.
So we're
And it's like, have you
Yeah.
ever tried to put toothpaste back in the tube?
mhm,
That we'll talk about tipping points in a little bit.
Mhm.
We'll get back to that. Years ago, at some museum, and I forget where, there was this diorama from the early Middle Ages of a beautiful castle sitting in, a mixed woodland farmland setting. And then it had all these little buttons you could press. You press a button, and there was something next to it written out, and a light would come on in the castle. The whole point was that for the Lord and his immediate family,
mhm,
they needed 50 servants
mm,
to provide their lifestyle. And whereas the Lord of the Manor probably slept in a very nice bed with a down quilt, is my guess, most of his retainers, the other 50, slept on a straw pallet on the floor somewhere, maybe out in the barn, maybe down in the kitchen, wherever. And it seems to me one of the problems today is that no longer the 50 are willing to sleep on the floor and eat the scraps. Think of China, with about a fourth of the world's population. Whoops, a little dog came into the library and
Got
got me distracted. Everybody wants to live like the Lord of the Manor.
mhm,
So everybody wants the feather bed with the quilt and the steak on the table. Well, maybe once upon a time the earth could support one person and the 50,
mhm.
But if everybody wants to live like the king and we keep on having more everyone's, the world is not infinite. It's a finite rock. So anyway, I thought that was very interesting. Part of our problems. Okay, this is the fun part. Did I want to talk about tipping points first? Not yet. Okay. Jackie, in 2 minutes, we need your little story tale. Are you going to be able to pop in for just 2 minutes? Okay. Back in the middle 80s was when scientists first began sending out alarm calls. It's getting warmer. We're going to have problems. We got to do something about it. Well, a lot of people back then questioned, well, how do we know that's happening? As time, 30 years now, almost have gone by. Yeah, almost 30 years have gone by. Is that right? No,
Over 30.
40 years. Less and less people are questioning that, but we still have some that don't believe it. So I thought I would try to make a feeble attempt to explain how we know. Alrighty, the first is antidotes. And I'm going to drag Jackie. Hi, just come on in. We're on air, and she just has to give a quick story. Jackie's one of our new librarians, and
I'll just grab a chair.
Okay.
And you can scoot it.
She's going to describe anecdotally. Is that how you say it?
Anecdotally.
Anecdote is, like a story you experienced, or maybe your parents or grandparents. It's usually not much further back in time than that. So, Jackie, what's your story about the weather?
Well, we're talking about Easter, right?
Easter, okay.
Okay. So I remember when I was little, something that we look forward to as kids was that we got to pick out a new Easter dress from the Sears catalog.
Sears, right.
Yeah, so the big, thick
I
catalog,
know, yeah.
glossy photos. And we always picked out like taffeta dresses, very
Yellow,
springy,
pink.
pinks and blues and yellows and everything. And it was weather appropriate, it seemed. And now I'm thinking, my gosh, do we ever get a springtime? When do we have a warm spring?
Aha.
And how do you explain that? You were talking to me about that.
Okay. So that's an anecdote. She remembers now. When she told me that story, I thought, I don't like that story because it doesn't fit into that things are getting warmer. But then we brought up what about Easter being
feast, right?
What about Easter being movable?
That it could be,
End of March,
right? End of March or all the way to the middle of April.
Right? End of April, about
right?
Yeah, 21st to 21st, give or take a few
Mhm.
days. Also, which I didn't mention, not every spring, let's say April 10th, is going to be the same from year to year to year. Some of us know sometimes spring comes early,
Mhm.
sometimes it comes late.
Mhm.
Sometimes it seems like we jump right from winter to summer.
That's happening more recently, and we'll talk about erratic weather later. But I decided, you can't wean out what you maybe doesn't fit into your theory, because that's not science and it's not fair. So, however, how accurate are memories? Do you only remember the one year you couldn't wear it because it was so cold?
Right,
Did
exactly.
you write in?
I wasn't-
for record?
I was not keeping a journal.
Ah, okay. Thank you. She'll come back later. What are you coming back for later? Remind me so I remember. What was it?
Oh, the
Christmas.
gym. Yeah.
Christmas. Okay. All righty. Antidotes. Well, I have an antidote and we have a pretty picture for it. When I first moved back here almost 40 years ago, I'm a gardener and I love snow crocus, which is the common name for basically the wild species crocus. They are smaller than the ones that come from Europe and the nurseries, and they tend to bloom about 3 weeks sooner. So back in the middle 80s, my snow crocus on the south side of the house, because they bloom sooner than the ones on the north side. They would bloom usually the third week in April, let's say around the 21st of April, give or take, depending on the season. But what was the crocus only open their blooms on a sunny day. And then if it's rainy or cold at night, the petals close around the pollen
Mhm.
to protect it. So what you're looking for is probably 40-ish, 45 and sunny, and then they open up. And what was so amazing to me, every year they open up and the honeybees were there. They were in sync.
Mhm.
Somehow the honeybees who had been, what do they do in the winter? They don't exactly hibernate,
but
not
yeah.
really, but they are in their hives wherever it is,
Keeping warm.
keeping warm by, and they knew, because there they were, two of them together. Now, almost 40 years later, the crocus are blooming usually 2 weeks ahead of time, if you want to call the traditional, responding to the warmer, earlier spring weather.
Mhm.
So let's say around the 7th of April,
Mhm.
the honeybees are no longer in sync.
Mhm.
They're just not there anymore. So that's one thing I have personally noticed. Now we have a picture of Walden Pond.
We do. Let me see here.
Okay. Now I think most people have heard of Thoreau,
Mhm.
that middle of the 1800s rebel who, we'd probably call him a bum nowadays because he didn't really want to go and have a job, did he? He wanted to go live out with nature. And did he build a cabin or was there a
He
cabin
built it.
there? Okay, either he found a cabin, he renovated, or he lived there, but only for 2 years.
Mhm.
However, for about 15 years around that time, every spring he would walk around Walden Pond and record in a notebook, Jackie, not just memories. Exactly. He would go the same path, the same spots. When did the wood violet bloom?
Mm.
When did the bloodroot bloom? When did the hepatica bloom? And he would write it down. Now, that journal was sort of known, but sort of forgotten.
Mhm.
So he did that in the 1860s, I think, give or take 5-10 years on
Mhm.
either side of that. Some professor up there in New England somewhere, maybe 5 or so years ago, I think I bought the book and gave it to the library. Can't remember now. Discovered this journal in the library. You know how books get lost in the library
Sure do.
sometimes. Well, you put them in the wrong space and then they stay there for 100
Or
years
they
or something.
fall down
or
behind
fall
everything.
behind.
Yep.
Okay. And he was so excited because he was working on global warming and he wanted something concrete to compare. So, being a professor, he assigned, I always love this, to his grad student what to do. So that grad student for 2 or 3 years, at least one, maybe two, possibly 3 years, did what Thoreau did and tromped around, which is now a park, and recorded where those spring flowers, when they bloomed. Now, the interesting thing about this is, as we all know, some springs come early, some come late. However, the bloom is always in the same order. In my woods, it's always, let me think for a minute. The Dutchman's breeches, the trout lilies, and the spring beauties always bloom first. They're followed by the bloodroot. They're followed by the trillium, almost a month apart between the earliest and the trillium in May. So even though they may start sooner or later, their order is the same. And so after 2 or 3 years of updating the rose record, they came up with, I think it was 3 to 4 or 5 days earlier in the springtime up in Massachusetts, right? Walden is in Massachusetts. Okay. So that's a record that goes back coming up pretty soon on 200 years. So what's our next? Tree rings. And by the way, Melanie once again found all these wonderful images for us to see. Alrighty.
Do you want the other one?
Let's look at this one first,
Okay.
and then we're going to look at the other one. Tree rings. Did we find the date on that? We didn't, did we? I'm thinking it's 5. There's a Bristol cone. Some pine trees out west in the mountains, like the Bristol cone pine, live for 5,000 years, guys. That's older than the pyramids. So what we're doing is now we're looking at evidence, each one going back further in time. Oh, you have your little light thing. You see the difference between those wider bands and further to that narrow band? Keep going. That tree ring, the tree ring tells you a couple of things. Was it a wet year? Was it a dry year? Was it a short summer? Did a frost come late in the spring or early in the fall or both? And so by measuring the diameter of the rings, you can tell something about the growing conditions. So let's look at she just found a bristlecone pine up in the White Mountains of California that live 5,000 years, that are pretty old. When I first started studying anthropology a long time ago, I was always interested in the Southwest. And the big mystery of the day 50 years ago was, why did the Anasazi who built those, well, first of all, why did they build the cliff dwellings? And then why did they just up and leave? And they pretty much up and left, sort of like the dinosaurs up and left. It wasn't a trickle over 100-year migration. It was pretty much all in 1 year. And where did they go? They disappeared. Let's go back to the tree rings. Probably, if I had thought enough ahead, I could have gotten Melanie to find us a tree ring from a tree from 800 some years ago. Because when you start studying dendrology, the study of tree rings, they realized that the Anasazi pretty much left, I'm going to round it off, but it was around 1200. So that's a little over 800 years ago, abandoning their home sites. If you study the tree rings from the area that go back to that time, starting in 1174, 26 years before, a drought started, a mega drought, sort of like what's happening now in the Southwest. These people were subsistence farmers more than hunter-gatherers. They still hunted and gathered, but basically they were farmers. And they really knew how to farm in a dry land. But you can only go so far. And after 26 years, I can just see the town council sitting down and saying, okay, folks, this is it. We have tried and tried and tried, and we have reached the end of our rope, and we're getting out of here. And where did they go? They went to the Rio Grande. in New Mexico, the river that runs
Mhm.
through from north to south, and settled and became the ancestors eventually of the various pueblos that are there
Mhm.
now. That's the modern take on what happened. So now we're 5,000 years ago. We can tell what the seasons were.
Mhm.
How much further back can we go? Let's see. What do we have? Well, let's do the ice cores next because we discovered the pollen was even older. I thought the
Mhm.
pollen. Okay, what's this, Melanie? Since you found it,
This is ice core drilling in Greenland.
is that the ice core there? It looks
Yep,
like
this
one of
is the
those
ice core.
lightsabers, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
When I was researching this, there's a website called icecores.org,
Okay.
and it has a ton of great videos. It has pictures of like how they store all of the
Oh
ice
yeah.
cores,
Gotta
and
store it cold.
it's incredible. I highly recommend that.
Okay. What are they doing up there besides freezing their butts? Why are they doing this?
To get that ice core to learn about what was happening.
Climate. Okay. Let me think. What were those statistics we found? You wrote them down, so you instead of me hunting for them.
In
In Greenland,
in
how
Greenland, they go back. They can tell us back as far as 130,000 years.
okay, 130,000
Mhm.
years ago. And how deep they went 8,000 feet,
8,000. Yep.
feet down before they hit the bedrock of Greenland,
Mhm.
the big island underneath all this ice sheet. And then you found something about Antarctica.
In Antarctica, it goes back 800,000 years, and I didn't look up the distance on that.
Okay, 800,000 years in
Mhm.
Antarctica. All righty. Now, after that big windstorm we
Mhm.
had at Christmas time, my small pond in front of the house had been frozen over,
Mhm.
and it was littered with Norway spruce needles.
Mhm.
What happens to those needles when the ice melts?
They sink down.
They sink down. Alrighty. Or if, like on an ice cap, much of it in the old days never melted, it just kept piling up.
Mhm.
So they got embedded in the ice. Pollen,
Mhm.
insects, whatever. So in an ice core, which you then store in a
Mhm.
cold place, and you can slice it very, 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 very thin.
Mhm.
Think like that, sheet of paper. And then looking with a microscope, you can see what's at that level,
Mhm.
whether it's a dead fly wing,
Mhm.
and if you're good on flies, you know exactly what kind of fly
Mhm.
that wing belonged to, or pollen.
Mhm.
Oh, that's from the paper birch,
Mhm.
or that's from a Scots pine,
Mhm.
whatever.
And even bacteria, they were able to see all these bacteria that don't exist now, that existed
Oh,
back
that
then.
were
Yeah,
extinct.
yeah.
Okay. So anyway, that's exciting. And that takes us back, and we're not up to 1,000,000 years yet, but 130,000 and then 800,000 years ago. Pretty impressive. I want to mention one other thing without going into great details because it can get pretty complicated. Let's just say oxygen that we breathe that's in the atmosphere basically is O2, two oxygen atoms hooked together, molecule of oxygen. But every now and again, we get something called O3, which is heavier. I think it's an isotope, extra neutron. The amount in the atmosphere of oxygen to its isotope
Mhm.
depends on the temperature.
Mm.
And some oxygen, of course, gets dissolved with hydrogen to make water. So in these ice cores, we can replicate the percentage of O3 to O2.
Oh, sure.
And
So that would help.
and that would
determine temp-
and that could say, okay, 800 million years ago, the ratio of the isotope to the regular oxygen was such and such. Oh, that means the temperature, the air temperature was such and such.
Mhm.
Isn't that amazing? Yes, it is. All righty. And finally, the pollen on the pond and the bog.
Mhm.
Now, people may not know this. Lakes and ponds have a lifespan sort of same as human beings. I hate to say, most ponds and lakes, if left to their own devices without human, interference, disappear within 100 years, especially the smaller ones.
I don't know what I did with it.
Where did it go? It's there somewhere.
Oh, you know what? We never got one.
Oh, we never got one.
No.
Okay, so in your mind's eye,
Mhm.
I have some Scots pines where my driveway is. So come June, my car is parked out in the driveway. Maybe it happens to you too.
Mhm.
And it's covered with this yellow pollen from the pines, which I think also makes me sneeze for
Mhm.
3 weeks. Well, some of that pollen dust from not only my pines, but everything else that's making pollen is landing on the water as well on a pond, sinks to the bottom, becomes part of the muck, the mud. As time goes by, pond becomes a bog usually,
Mhm.
and then dry land, da 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 da. But just like up in Greenland, if you get a special
Mhm.
drill, you can core down into that and you get up the pollen,
Mhm.
which you can then slice very thinly and look at under a microscope. And how much do you,
How did it? Was it 200 million?
um, yes, 200 million years ago. Now
Mhm.
that's getting back in time, folks.
Mhm.
Before, while the dinosaurs were all
Yeah.
roaming around, when Pangea, everything, all the
Mhm.
continents were together,
Mhm.
right? Yes, 200 million years ago. So you see, guys, we do have ways of knowing what the climate was like back in the day, before Grandma and Grandpa. All righty. Chipping points. How are we doing on time?
1207.
Okay, plenty of time. I have a great story about tipping points. And if for some reason one of my students from all those years ago ever listens to this, they will die laughing because they'll remember. I was a science teacher back then in a private school for girls. And of course, that made me the head of the science club. And we probably had 12 girls from 9th through 12th grade in the
Mhm.
science club. And every year at Christmas, we had a little, like a fair. And every club was supposed to make something. Oh, I just thought of the other thing that we made. To sell to the parents to make money for our club. Well, I'll have to tell you the bad thing we did. Look, silly me, the chemistry teacher, I should have known better. They all brought in a bag of pine cones.
Mhm.
And then we took the chemicals from my storeroom. Sodium, lithium, barium, what else? So I forget now. And then we dissolved it in water
Mhm.
and soaked the pine cones, dried them out, put them in a bag for $1. You were to put them in your fireplace. And then they would, the sodium, of course, makes the orangey color.
Mhm.
The barium makes green, beautiful green. You don't want to breathe it. The lithium made a beautiful lavender color, as I remember. And I forget, something made blue, but I forget what it was. Probably shouldn't have done that. You probably do it now. Okay, but that was back in the day when we didn't know any better. But the fun thing we did was make rock candy, right? Geology. All those diamonds,
Mhm.
that's simply molten, dissolved minerals. So carbon for diamonds in a molten, and then it cools very, very, very slowly. The crystals begin to grow. You
Mhm.
might get a beautiful diamond or a ruby or whatever, or rock candy. You've seen rock candy. Do they sell it anymore? It's usually on a string, right?
Oh yeah, my dad made it too.
Work?
Every Christmas.
Well, we didn't do it right. So there we were in the back room with the stove and the big pot, and the water was boiling, and we kept adding sugar because you have to reach the saturation point, the tipping point. And then if you put your strings in, supposedly the crystals will all form on the strings. Well, and we were stirring, big wooden spoon. I was stirring, I think, at that point. Well, I don't know what happened, but all of a sudden, rather than forming individual crystals on the string, the whole pot solidified in one big solid sugar mass with the wooden spoon stuck in the middle. I mean, it happened, bing, just like that.
Yeah.
I don't remember what we did with it. I think we probably put it under the faucet and let it dissolve with water running on it. Yeah. Anyway, don't follow the better directions.
Yeah. I know it's sort of difficult and the humidity matters.
Ah,
Because if it's too humid, it would be really sticky.
okay. maybe it incorporated some water hydro with the sugar crystals, I'm guessing.
Mhm.
Okay, my sad tale of my rock candy. Now, we went over this. Do you want to present the a tipping point means a process
Mhm.
reaches a point where all of a sudden the rate of the process increases rapidly.
Mhm.
Like the crystals just all at once, not over an hour, or it was supposed to be overnight, I think. We were supposed to
Yeah.
leave it sitting overnight. Okay. And it's also a point where you can't go back.
Mhm.
Once it has started, you cannot go back.
Mhm.
So what about we have pictures of it, right? What's happening up in the Arctic
This one.
with its ice cover? And before we talk about it, before Melanie talks about it, I want to point out Greenland.
Oh, yeah, this is green.
Now, Greenland is an island, a rocky island, pretty much covered by this ice sheet.
Mhm.
It's not quite like a glacier. It's more like an ice cap, but it's slowly flowing from the upper center gradually out and down because that's the bedrock underneath, I think, is sort of shaped like that.
Mhm.
However, the Arctic Ocean, which is to the north and all around the pole, is an ocean. It's not Antarctica, it's an ocean. But until recently, it's been covered totally year round by an ice sheet, do they call it?
Mhm.
An ice sheet floating on the ocean. So what have we got here?
So
You can-
this yellow line shows between 1979 and 2000, it averaged this big,
Okay.
the ice sheet.
Now let's just wait a second. Let's get oriented here. This is Canada with
Mhm.
Ellesmere Island and all the islands up there.
Mhm.
This is Alaska, right?
Yeah.
What's oh, okay. That's what that governor, that woman Palin said you could see across to
Mhm.
Russia, which you
Mhm.
can't.
No.
The Bering Strait.
Yep.
Okay, and so that's Siberia, right?
Mhm.
By the way, while I think about it, when the Ice Age was at its height, 18,000
Mhm.
years ago, the sea level was about 400 feet lower,
Mhm.
which meant, you want to draw,
Yep.
that became a land bridge,
Mhm.
quite a bit wider,
Mhm.
1,500 miles wide. So it went, because the sea there is very shallow.
Mhm.
And so that is how the Native Americans, we argue now about when, they keep pushing the date back.
Mhm.
The traditional idea was about 15,000 years ago, they were able to cross over from Siberia to Alaska on not a narrow little bridge, but one
Mhm.
1,500 miles wide. Yeah, quite wide. Now the theory is that there was another warm spell, more like maybe possibly even 35,000 years ago.
Mhm.
So anyway, okay, to get back to
Yeah.
what's happened.
So the ice sheet used to be
Mhm.
this big.
Yep.
Now it's this big.
All righty. The prediction is by 2040,
Mhm.
less than 20 years, it'll be gone in the summer. Now, Melanie, how is this a tipping point? An ice cover versus an open ocean for 3-4 months.
Because when it's a large sheet of ice, it reflects the sunlight.
Right. You know how you go, if it's a sunny day and there's snow everywhere and you go out and it's like, oh, where did my sunglasses go? Because quite a bit of the energy from the sun, light and heat, is
Mhm.
being reflected back off of the white.
Mhm. But then when it's reduced, the size of it's reduced, you have that dark color of the ocean, which is going to absorb all that heat.
Mhm. And guys, if you have never done this experiment, you should do it. Black handkerchief and a white handkerchief. You've done this?
No, but I know.
Okay. What happens? It's a beautiful snowy day. The snow has stopped. What do? It's like a 6th grade science experiment.
Yeah, I would assume that the black one would feel warm.
Oh, I'm gonna lay it out on the snow.
Oh, okay,
The black one and the white one.
okay.
What's gonna happen by the end of the day?
There's not gonna be snow on the black one.
Like the ocean,
Right.
it's gonna absorb more of the sun,
Mhm.
which is why the Arabs usually would wear light colored clothing in
Mhm.
the desert. You want to reflect the heat of the sun. Where your snowsuits for
Mhm.
kids should be dark colored,
Mhm.
absorb the heat from the sun. Yeah, the snow under the, depending on how
Mhm.
thick it was, is going to be a lot less than under the white
Mhm.
handkerchief. Try that. I don't
Yeah.
do. And then next time you can come back and say, it was 4 inches
Oh,
versus
yeah, fair.
be a scientist,
We
measure it.
gotta get some.
We have to get some, who knows, who knows? All right, where am I going with this? All righty, so it becomes a self-enforcing
Mhm.
cycle, or it
Mhm.
accelerates, it increases the acceleration because the warmer, the dark water absorbs more heat, gets warmer,
Mhm.
melts more ice, da 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 da, keeps going. All righty, I think I had another example. Where is it? Do we have any other pictures we want to show? Oh, okay. Here's my second example is the permafrost
Mm.
up in the north of the Arctic, around the Arctic, in Canada, in Alaska.
Here comes Jordan.
Here comes what?
Jordan.
Jordan actually signed in. Ah, the West Coast woke up and signed in. Okay. We're talking about permafrost. Are you there, Jordan? Can you hear us? He's having troubles with his computer. I don't know. Remember a couple of weeks ago we couldn't hear him. Anyway, anybody that's lived in Alaska or has read about Alaska realizes that one of the problems of living up there, towns or by yourself, is the permafrost. Because what is permafrost? I should explain that, I suppose. There are certain parts of the world in the north that it's so cold for most of the that sometimes the ground stays frozen
Mhm.
all year long. But there are places where the top inch to a foot or two
Mhm.
thaws in June, July, August, and then freezes up again. That's called permafrost because underneath the soil is frozen always. Well, if the soil that thaws is fairly thin, then you can build your foundation of houses and roads, etc. Dealing with that. But if the whole shebang starts to melt every summer, your foundations collapse, your roads go crazy, and it makes it much more difficult to live up there, to say nothing of the extended mosquito season.
Oh, I was thinking of the long night, when the sun doesn't rise.
Yeah.
That
Well,
would be difficult.
what would?
Living in the darkness or
In
something.
the darkness. Yes, that's true.
She would adapt.
That's another whole topic. We won't
Okay.
go there. The morose Swedes and the drunken Siberians and all of this and that, because of, well, sad seasonal affective disorder. We evolved around the equator.
Mhm.
Our bodies say, no, I want that 12 hours. And if you don't give it to me, I'm not going to be happy.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay. Back to the permafrost. As the temperature rises, more and more of the permafrost is melting. And when it melts, the trapped moss, dead wood, all that, dead flies, comes out as carbon dioxide, but more important, we don't hear about it as much, methane, CH4, which is like 18 times worse as far as global warming goes than carbon dioxide. So it's kicking more, we're not doing it. Nature is doing it. And so it not only does it create havoc for foundations and roads and whatnot, but it's one of those cycles where the warmer it gets, the more it melts, the more carbon dioxide. So it's one of those self-reinforcing cycles. And I forgot to ask you to look up, but the Arctic actually is warming much faster than the rest of the world. I think by 10 degrees.
Mm.
Well, we can double check that if we have time at the end of the hour. I think it's 10 degrees warmer there than it used to be.
Mm.
Okay, results. All right. We're just going to talk about maybe one or two before for this time. Obviously, the sea level is rising. Now, this is for two basic reasons. As everything gets warmer, more glaciers and ice sheets on land, like Antarctica and Greenland, as they melt, and they are almost everywhere, that water then flows into the ocean and causes it to rise. The ice sheets, like what we looked at up there on the Arctic Ocean, when they melt, it doesn't change the level of the ocean. Think of your gin and tonic with the ice cubes and it's filled to the top and you kind of forget it. And you go back 2 hours later, the ice is all melted, but it hasn't overflowed the glass.
Right.
Yeah. So the ice sheets around Antarctica and around the Arctic can melt and it's not going to change. But the glaciers melting will raise the sea level. And the other thing is warm water takes up more room than cold water. And the one statistic that's stuck in my head is the state of Louisiana, think Katrina. Over the last 100 years, the sea has the difference is 2 feet.
Oh, wow.
That's for two reasons. About a foot is due to the warmer water, but the other foot is due to the sinking land. So if you have the ocean going up and the land going down, you're going to have a difference. And why is the land going down? Well, in Louisiana, or any coastal area where there are big cities, everybody's got water. Where does the water come from for drinking and bathing? It comes from the groundwater. You suck the groundwater out. There's no such thing as a vacuum. The salt water comes in and or the land collapses. So they both is happening. The land is sinking and also salt water is intruding, and places like Miami, Charleston, and Savannah are all beginning to have problems with salty water now. So that's a problem. Let's see. Just when we first started learning about this in the middle 80s, late 80s, it was off in the future, 2100, 2200. We weren't going to be around. Neither were our grandkids. We didn't really have to worry about it. But what's happening, and this is very, to me, disconcerting, in the last 5 years, the scientists who study this, it's happening faster than they thought. And I think where 40 years ago, a lot of people were skeptical. Now, with what we're seeing day to day, the mega drought out in the Southwest, the horrible, horrible fires that are happening, mostly in the West. I always like, that erratic weather, like Pakistan. I think it's hard, you don't hear much about Pakistan, unlike the earthquake. But Pakistan, if we were Pakistan and had a flood like they had, what was that, months ago? All of America, all of the US, from the Atlantic coast to the middle of Kansas, would have been underwater. Right? Or was it just, no, I think it was to Chicago. A third of the country, totally underwater. All right. Yeah, I one in there like it's how many more minutes have we got? Just
About 5.
okay. I want to just mention 2 problems that most people don't think about. And I have to look here to make sure I remember it rightly. Okay. Once again, from scientifically studying the past, when the amount of carbon dioxide goes up in the atmosphere, the ocean becomes more acidic. And it doesn't have to go up much, not even a whole pH number. And when that happens, the coral begins to die, as we well know. Half of the Great Barrier Reef in Australia has died, pretty much. Who knows if it can be brought back? And you might want to say, well, so what? I don't eat coral. But the coral reefs are the nurseries of the ocean, where many species raise their young or drop their eggs to raise themselves. And with those gone, the nurseries are gone, and the whole population of food that we get from the ocean is rapidly declining. So that's one problem. Now, the second problem I find much more interesting because it affects the part of Europe that many of us are related to, like England. We've talked about the Gulf Stream.
Yeah, that's what
Great streams like the Gulf Stream in the ocean depend on the difference between the temperature and the salt content. Let's go up to the North Atlantic, where the Gulf Stream finally winds its way up past Scotland, where palm trees grow on the west coast of Scotland. Really? Because if you went straight west from Scotland, you'd hit Labrador. Then what the hell are palm trees doing growing at the latitude of Labrador on the west coast of Scotland? It's all because of that Gulf Stream, bringing all that warmth from the tropics. But right above that and to the west is Greenland, which is melting its huge ice sheet.
Yeah.
And that is pure water pouring into the salty North Atlantic, changing the salinity. And I'm going to say making it colder, I think. We're upsetting that balance.
Yeah.
And guess what, guys? It's happened before, several times in the last couple of million years or whatever it's been. The Gulf Stream collapses. It just, within 2, 3, 4, 5 years, it's gone. Now, if that happens again, and scientists say if this keeps up, it will happen again, maybe within 100 years. London, which is now zone 7, think Virginia, is going to be like Labrador. Zone 3.
Wow.
Oh, wow, it's right. And not just England, probably Germany and France, and Scandinavia too a bit. Although they're pretty cold to begin with, but they're going to get colder. So that is something quite serious.
Can you explain how the carbon dioxide in the air makes the ocean more acidic?
Yeah, right. Okay. Think of rainwater. We call it acid rain.
Yeah.
The carbon dioxide dissolves with water. That's how we get caves also. The rain that's a bit acidic from the carbon dioxide in it dissolves the limestone and makes the caves. But that's basically how I believe how it happens. Yeah. So more carbon dioxide is going to combine more with the water and make the water slightly. And remember, tipping points can be very, very, very little. Anybody that's stepped out the door when all of a sudden it went from 32.5 to 32, that's only a half a degree. And there's that black ice, and there you are with a broken back, right? All right, let's I think we're almost out of time, right?
Yep.
Just quickly, if they now are saying there's a likelihood that by the end of the century, less than 80 years, the sea levels will be 6 feet higher. We did a bunch of how high are various cities. Let's just mention one. Miami. What did you say, Miami?
6.5 feet above sea level.
Miami is only 6.5 feet above sea level. Now, is that when the waves are high or medium or what? Or what about a storm when the waves are much higher? So there's Miami, 6 inches above sea level. All right. Next time, I want to talk about erratic weather.
Oh, did you want to mention how many people live?
Oh, yeah. And how many people live within 6 feet? Did we decide, or 10?
Yeah, 6 feet of sea level. It's 634 million people.
600. Let's round it off to a little over 600 million. So
we're coming up on 10%.
Close to 10% of the world lives
within 6 feet.
Within 6 feet. All right. Okay, guys. Allegheny County is not going to be empty anymore, are we? We're all gonna move here. Alrighty, next time, erratic weather with our yo-yo winters and our droughts or our downpours. And then what can we do about it? I tend to be a pessimist, studying history and human nature. But I want to be an optimist. We are very rapidly, and I've been hearing this for decades, very rapidly reaching the point where we won't be able to go back. I'm guessing 5 years now, because we've just ignored the warning signs and dragged our heels and didn't want to spend the money. So don't spend $1 billion. Wait till the disaster and spend 10 billion, which is what you imagine what it's going to cost Pakistan to rebuild. Or the people in, was it Paradise, California, where the whole town burnt down? And how many people died? 70 or 80? So you have a choice. Okay, quit preaching. And all righty. Thank you for all those beautiful images.
Okay, I'm gonna stop